I haven't made a post for a while because I've been busy with other things, so apologies for that, but I want to come back to the sketchbook and start talking about the colour part of the book. And I'm using two examples here of a recent sketchbook page of Ivy and one that I did in 2021 here, which I've just revisited. And when you get a little bit stuck sometimes with your sketchbook, it's nice to go back and finish something off. So I've got an image here of how this sketch page looked previously. So I hadn't finished the leaves and it was a little bit incomplete, so worth returning to. So you can see that I've added quite a bit. So I wanted it to be a bit more in keeping with this one, and I've changed kind of my approach a little bit since that time. So I did this one in January this year, and now the ivy flowers are blooming, as here. I wanted to add those and some buds and to colour these leaves, and that's what I was going to talk about here. Also a little ladybug, because they seek a bit of refuge there over the winter months in the ivy and on other plants as well. I saw quite a few of them yesterday sitting in the leaves. So that's where I'm at with this sketchbook page revisited, and I was going to relate this back to the book and page 45 here, which talks about these dark value colours, and a lot of what's in the ivy is dark value colours. So using this colour wheel here is where I would kind of be mixing the colours for the ivy leaves and also the ivy berries as well, but they were already done previously. But they're the dark value colours in my palette, such as indanthrine blue, permanent carmine and transparent yellow, which all these dark value colours in the wheel have been mixed from. And you can also see that I use a little example of a holly there, which is also in my sketchbook, and talk about the value of underlying blues in these dark shiny leaves. And that's what's happened here really. I've used a lot of underlying cobalt blue, and I've used those dark value colours as well. The indanthrine blue and the transparent yellow and the permanent carmine are all in there in those leaves. But it's not good enough just to have those colours, you have to look at the technique as well. And you'll also see in the book that I made some little examples of how painters applied different techniques with watercolour and dry brush techniques there on page 49 to 51. And I make these little cards of watercolour techniques, which you can see here. And if you do all of the work with wet washes on this type of leaf, you're just not going to get the intensity of colour that you need. So you need a few things going on really. The first is an underlying blue, and there's lots of underlying blue here in these leaves. You might not see it so obviously, but it's there. I can assure you it's there, and it's in the other page as well. There's lots of underlying blue. It goes down first. The back of the leaves are lighter and there's more yellow in them, but the front of the leaves have some very dark areas and these veins. So there's the underlying blue goes down, and then some graded washes with the green, and you can see this on this sheet here, the graded washes and all the different techniques, blended washes, two different colours together, overlaying, painting on to dry will give you much darker colours, and painting into damp as well. And I use quite a lot of these techniques, so I can grade the colour on first with the blue, I can grade the green on top of that, I can use the painting on to dry to overlay a different colour, and I can also paint into damp, and that'll give me quite an intensity of colour. But when it comes to the final stages, what I'm going to be using, and what I did use, is dry brush, either modelling or hatching. And in this case, in the leaves, I used a lot of hatching dry brush, where you use little tiny strokes. So you're using little tiny strokes to work in between, and quite often I do that onto damp, not onto dry, and it's just very slightly dampened using like a size 2 brush, and then a dry mix of paint on the palette to draw almost with your brush and shade these dark colours in. And that's how you get the intensity of colour that you need for these dark leaves. The same with the fruits there, and the same with all of it really. You know, you need this variety of techniques in your painting in order to get the depth of colour and the saturation of colour that you need. And dry brush really does give you the saturation of colour that's required in this type of plant. So here's a quick demo showing how I use those colours, starting with that cobalt blue and applying it, just selectively dampening the paper first with clean water, and then just dropping colour in and grading it from where I need that colour, just in the areas where that blue shine is showing. So that dampened area first allows me to drop the colour on and just give a subtle first layer of cobalt blue just in the highlight areas. So next up, I take the dark value colours that I spoke about in Danthering Blue, Transparent Yellow, and mix those two together. And then just a touch of Permanent Carmine will be added later. Just getting that blue yellow mix just right to get a deep, rich green. And I'll probably have to add a little bit more blue to it as well. And just keep going with that mix until you get it right. And what you will notice is it's quite creamy. It's not runny. And I'm holding that little palette dish upright, so it's not running there. It's quite a thick mix of paint, and this is really important. I'm also going to mix a more yellow bias version for the back of the leaf as well, adding a touch of red in there, and just keep mixing until you get the right colour match that you want. There's more blue going in again to get that darker, rich blue. So adding into a dampened area again, just adding some of that dark colour. So dampening it first and then adding that rich dark colour in. And I'm painting up to some of the veins. There's some veins that are prominent and others that are less prominent. I'll just pick out a few of them. You don't want them all in there. Just an indication of where they are. So working above the top vein there, and that's just below it, really tight into it, into damp. But I've got to preserve that blue highlight area. So I'm going to dampen and grade into that colour. So I've got two colours there, got the blue and the green, and just picking out a few veins as I work my way down the leaf into that darker green. And again, showing you how dry that paint is on the palette as well. So below there's another vein, just working below that. It's got to be really tight, the space for that vein. And that vein isn't white. It will have a colour on it eventually. Veins shouldn't be white, they're never white, especially in this situation because it's in shadow here. But for now, I'm just painting around it and up to it, just those main ones that are showing. Making sure the edge is clean as well, it's very important. And just working my way down. And this is possibly the darkest area of the leaf here. This will go the darkest, just this central area. I've got a lot of shadow there where it's indenting inwards, so it's quite a solid area of green. But going on that dampened surface underneath, and then I'll build that colour later with dry brush. I've got another highlight there at the bottom where I put that blue down at the beginning, so just working around that as well as the tip of the leaf there, in exactly the same way, dampening and then working the green into the blue, but not painting over it. And then I can start to build a little bit more colour, so another layer can go down of this dark green in the same way. And it takes quite a few layers to build up a dark green like this, but we've got to maintain that blue as well. So dampening is the best way of maintaining a highlight area or a different colour, that you can control it a lot more easily if you dampen, and you can then blend into the other colour, into the edge, so you don't have a hard edge and you don't paint over it. So you can see that going much darker now with this second layer. And then with every layer it gets a thicker mix of paint as well, a drier mix of paint on the palette, using less water with each layer, smaller strokes, and becoming more dry with the technique. And by using this approach, you can get much more saturated, intense colour, because that colour is really sitting much closer to the surface of the paper. If you try and use wet washes all over and you build like that, you get a lot of the colour going deep into the surface of the paper, and it diffuses it a bit and it dulls it a little as well. It can do if it goes too deep in the paper, if you think about what's actually happening when you use a lot of water. And quite often you'll get hard edges as well when you use a lot of water, because everything sort of migrates to the edge and it diffuses. And that's why when it dries, it might look okay when you put it on, but when it dries it looks a bit dull, and that's not what you want. So using this more dry technique and these small brush strokes allows you to control it. It's almost like using a pencil. And so that's the technique that I use to paint my leaves and all subjects really, but some are drier than others, but it's perfect for this kind of dark leaf here. And I'm just working carefully around the edge on the indent there and creating a little bit of texture as well. And that's the other thing about dry brushes, it allows you to create texture quite easily, whereas with wet techniques that's much more difficult. So it really puts you in control of the medium, really, that you can make areas darker where you want to and control into the highlights. And there's also very little drying time with this approach as well. It doesn't take any time at all to dry. So you can see I'm just continuing with that, just working carefully around those few veins that are there. I'm going to now put on the colour on the back, which is this more yellow bias version. So it's just the same mix of colours. It's got more yellow and a bit more red in the mix, so giving that different colour on the underside of the leaf there. So putting a base in for that first, leaving a slight light edge at the margin because the edge of an ivy leaf has this lighter margin to it, so just leaving that clear of paint, but adding this base colour on first, and then I'll add some shadow, and then I'll maybe darken that edge a little bit more once I put green on the more of the dark green on as well. So just going back and forth here and working my way through, bringing the leaf up in stages to a finished stage. And returning now to that dark green, building it again with more dry brush technique and working up to the margin that's overlapping there from the lighter underside of the leaf. So getting that sharp edge is important between the front and the back of the leaf. So working carefully here to get that sharp edge, and you've got to use the absolute tip of your brush with a light touch. There's a vein in there as well, so I'm putting an indication of that vein in that darker area there. I'm just going to build that darker colour up a bit more and get this sharp edge in around the overlap from the front to the back of the leaf. And I generally use a couple of brushes and something like that. For larger areas, I might use a size 4 Series 7 Winsor & Newton miniature, and for the smaller areas like this and the dry brush work, I'll use a size 2 of the same brush. But you can use many different types of brush. The Raphaels are good brushes, as are the Da Vinci brushes. I use a few different brushes, but the majority of the work that I do, I use these 2 brushes and do pretty much everything with them. I don't really find any need to go for a smaller brush very often. It's unusual for me to use anything smaller than a size 1. The problem with the very small brushes, and you think you might need them for dry brush, is that they don't hold enough paint and you can't really get the colour intensity of colour that you need, and you're forever dipping in the paint back and forth. So it's better to use a slightly larger brush as long as it's got a good point. That's the main consideration really for the brush, is that the point is good and that the belly will hold enough paint for you to work effectively. Otherwise it's very difficult to do this with a tiny brush. So just softening a bit of colour here. You can take a damp brush and just soften and smooth some of the dry brush work as well. And I'll continue to do that, sort of working it into the blue area, but maintaining the blue and working around the veins. And then I'll add a little yellow over those veins, adding a bit of shadow here to the back now to make this darker. And just really using soft strokes with the brush, just blending it into the underlying colour that's there. So into the latter stages now, I'm just going to drop in a bit of yellow onto the veins, just to take them down in colour, because as I say, they're not white. So using some transparent yellow, it's got a touch of blue in it as well here, and a touch of red. And then I can intensify the dark green now in this final stage of the inside. I'm not going to complete this leaf, it's just to give you an indication of the process really. So I'm going to take a even more sort of condensed mix of paint and make it fairly dry there, and using very small strokes now in this final push for the darks, just tiny little strokes of the brush there to intensify the darkest of the greens in the leaf. You can see how I'm using very small strokes. I'll work on all the areas I want to take darker, darken those veins now, so I can work up to them again, pushing them in a bit tighter. Very light strokes with the brush, and you can create a very nice soft finish with this dry brush technique. And it's very easily controlled as well. What you want to do is to make it dark, but not to make the paint too thick. So work very lightly with it. So if you were to take that and put that onto dry paper next to it, you see what that technique is like. It's just very small strokes like this. And you can, if you dampen underneath it first with clean water, sorry, this water's not very clean, but you get the idea, and you just let that sink in a little bit. You can do exactly the same thing over it and get a smoother, it's not quite dry enough yet, get a much smoother finish with that small stroke technique. So this one's a bit grainy, but when you apply it to damp, you can get a smoother finish with it. And you can also go over it afterwards and smooth it out with a very lightly dampened brush if you need to smooth the finish. You can do that with both of them. So you can paint dry brush onto dry, or you can actually paint it onto damp like that. And then you can smooth it again still, but don't make it too thick. And I can build in some more veins doing this as well, just indications of them, where I might want to put extra detail in. You can see how that's pushing that much darker. This side here, we would need a bit of a highlight on, where this front of the leaf, I haven't done that, I've left that till last. So using that blue here, right up to the green, so make sure that's dry, that green, and don't paint over it. And then dry brush, or a little bit of colour anyway, into that blue edge, but just maintaining that blue edge. Again, using that dampened approach will allow me to control it really easily, as opposed to painting over it. So I've still got the edges to sort out a bit around here, a little bit darker here and there, but I'm not going to finish it off, but it's just to give you an idea of the approach and techniques and how to use them, using dry, using these dark colours, and I hope that you find that useful and helpful in how you approach leaves. And I'll just continue with this sped up for a minute or so, and next time in the next video I'll show you how to make one of those technique sheets that I showed you earlier in the video, that shows you all the different techniques that you can use and where they might be useful.